Okay, hello, good afternoon, happy lunchtime. I'm Jane Dutton, and I'm one of the faculty members in the center, and I am the organizer for this series. This is the fourth and final talk in this series that we've had on positive organizations and positive relationships, and we could end with no finer person than Wayne Baker. I'm going to formally introduce him in a minute, but first I want to let Kim Cameron give you a pitch for next term, because he's organized that for our session in PosLinks for the next term. So Kim, why don't you come do that?
So I'm not nearly as enthusiastic and attractive and energizing as Jane, but I'll try my best to tell you about the 4 sessions during winter semester. We start off in January with Gretchen, who I think most of us know well, who just continually does sort of interesting, spectacular work on thriving and on empowerment and energy and a whole bunch of topics like that. So we're going to learn a lot from Gretchen, who's our in-house person. In February, Brandon Bastide is coming. Brandon has been at the Gallup organization for approximately 1 year, heading their education business. So they are applying POS to education organizations, primarily K through 12. They have just extraordinary stories and interesting breakthroughs, transformations that Brandon is going to tell you. It'll be data-packed, and you'll learn a lot about what they're doing in education. There has actually been created a positive education association in the world, and they've not yet had their first meeting. But anyway, that's a whole other topic, but we may be joining with them in a way. March, Afton Hassett is coming. Afton is in the medical school, who has been on the program at the International Positive Psychology Association now 2 or 3 years in a row, and I didn't even know she was here. I mean, we are so siloed, and she's just doing this extraordinary work on positive practices and the impact on physiology and physical health. And so Afton is going to come over and talk about several research projects she's doing that are really, really fascinating. And then in April, Bob Valorand, who is in Montreal at McGill, he was the immediate past president of the International Positive Psychology Association and is sort of the world's best known researcher on passion and meaning and POS kind of stuff and passion. So, and he's a psychologist. So those are the 4, and you'll learn a lot. I'll learn a lot. I'm really excited to have them come. The theme is POS across different disciplines. Thanks, Jane.
Yeah, so stay tuned. It should be a great term. And I also, before I introduce Wayne, sorry for the long lead-in, Wayne, to introducing you, but also to thank Paul Jones. Paul and his wife Diane have just been wonderful supporters, and they've sort of endowed the PosLinks series. So they allow us to bring in not just the locals, but the people from a distance, and to treat them well. And speaking of treating them well, Janelle, who just walked in, is the person from the center who has just done a beautiful job this whole term in organizing the Positive Links series. She does a lot behind the scenes to make it go smoothly, and again, also so that my favorite thing is when the speakers leave, they say, "We've never been treated so well by a university." And Janelle is single-handedly, I think, making that happen. Okay, so that's all the thank yous to Janelle and to Paul Jones. Now let me introduce my fantastic colleague, Wayne Baker, who is officially the Robert B. Thorne, is it Thom? Is that right, Wayne? Thorme Professor of Business and Management Organizations. He's one of these wonderful scholars who bridges fields, so he actually has a dual appointment in the business school and in sociology. We stole him from the University of Chicago many years ago, and since we stole him, he has enriched our department with his creative scholarship and also his courageous teaching and leading. He is currently in the final year. I'm sure he's happy about that as chair of the Management and Organizations Department. But one of the many things I just want to highlight with Wayne, he's one of these rare scholars who really shines as a true scholar, academic scholar, and also someone who from the very beginning of his career has spoken to practitioners. So he's done a beautiful job of sort of linking or bridging the academic practitioner divide. He's done that not only with his articles, but also importantly with his books. One of my favorite books, if you've not read it, is Networking Smart. These are just some of the books. America's Crisis of Values, Citizenship and Crises, and he has a brand new book coming out which has a long title, but it's called United America, The Surprising Truth About American Values, American Identity, and the 10 Beliefs That a Large Majority of Americans Hold Dear. So we can look forward to that book as well. He also has a very popular blog. For those of you who are interested at all in sort of the general topic of values, one of the things Wayne has done is he's brought values sort of back into the story, both in organization studies but also in sociology. And he has a great blog called ourvalues.org, which he told me has 100,000 views a year. Is that right, Wayne? And just again to get a sense of Wayne's breadth, he's known for making contributions in the area of culture and values, energy networks, probably within the positive organizational scholarship field or application. That's probably the area that we know about him best, but he's done really pioneering work also in sociology on interorganizational networks, networks and crime, the sociology of markets and money. So he's just a splendid broad scholar, and he's bringing some of his his newest, I think, and very provocative and important work, particularly for positive organizational scholarship, to us today, with a title, Prosocial Behavior in Organizations, Positive Emotions or Strategic Reputation. So please join me in welcoming Wayne.
Thank you, Jane, for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it. And I also want to voice my thanks to Paul and Diane for funding this for so long, and thank you for doing that in regards to Diane. And I thank all of you for being here because I know it's finals week, although some of my PhD students have finished their papers, so they're free now. So I know the weather and the holidays and all that stuff, so I really appreciate you coming for the talk today. I'm going to talk about prosocial behavior. I'll give you a definition. It's a very big area of luminous literature. I'll kind of give you some insights on that. That's the broad context in which this study sits. I'm going to talk about two explanations of prosocial behavior, positive emotions, that we pay it forward out of gratitude for benefits received ourselves. And the other explanation is strategic reputation, is that we reward generous people and we shun or punish stingy people. Two very different explanations about why people would help those who have not helped them. I'm going to do something that has never been done before, is to put both mechanisms in the same study. This is a field where a lot of work has been done, but no one has yet said, well, if we did a horse race, we put both of them in, which one would win? And so I'm going to tell you the results and which one won. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about positive practices. That's how do you actually implement this. And the tool I'll talk about was the inspiration for the design of the study. And also the empirical study that I'll talk about, I want to acknowledge my co-author, Nathaniel Bulkley, who was a PhD in the School of Information here many years ago. He works in industry, never took an academic job, but he and I have worked together and labored on this project for a couple of years, and so I want to give him a lot of credit as well. Okay, so prosocial behavior is a broad class of costly actions performed to benefit someone else. So I might help someone who's never helped me, might cost some time, some energy, some effort, maybe risk to reputation, what have you. The thing is, well, why would I do that? Why would I help someone else who would not help me? Now, there might seem to be an obvious answer to that. One obvious answer is that I help someone else because I'm counting on them being there to help me in the future, kind of direct reciprocity. But I'm interested in it as a sociologist with beyond that. So why would somebody pay forward help received? Why do people reward or punish those who are generous and stingy? So it's a bigger or more sociological question. Very large literature. 3 different ways that people have approached it. One is at the micro level of prosocial behavior. This is the realm of evolutionary biology, where they're interested in the ultimate reason why cooperation and prosocial behavior emerged in the human species in the first place. Right, that's the big question there. Some work in psychology on that, not much. The second area is called the Meso level of prosocial behavior, and that is about helper-recipient dyad. So 2 people. Why 2 people would help one another. Huge amount of work done on that. And then the third level, which is the level of this study, is the macro level, is about prosocial behavior in group contexts, in organizations, in larger social settings. And so not much work done on that. That's where this study actually fits. All right, here's a story to illustrate one reason why people help one another. And I'm showing you a picture of here my wonderful sailboat. White Heels, a 1980 Mariner, 36-foot Mariner. We sail this up in Canada every summer. Right, so I'm going to tell you a story about this boat. All right, so this is where we keep it up where that green dot is. You know, Michigan is the mitten, right? We're up there by the Mackinac Bridge. And there we are down there in the Roskill right now. And what we do is we go up there and we travel into Canada. So we've done it every summer for quite a while. We plan to do it again this coming summer. So we go there. I'm going to give you a close-up now. Now we're in a little bit more. Right by Drummond Island, we cross over there, and we're into Canada. And then we go through a marvelous area called the North Channel, one of the top 10 boating spots in the world. We go that way, we go this way, and summer before last, we went to an area called McGregor Bay. McGregor Bay only recently became charted. Very treacherous area to take a boat into. A lot of submerged rocks that you can't see. You have to navigate very, very closely. It's high anxiety going in. It's a lot of fun. Right, going into this, taking your boat, I don't even make it all the way in. Well, we did. We got in there. We spent a couple of days in paradise by ourselves on our boat. It was a wonderful experience. Best fishing I ever had up there. And we liked it so much that we stayed 1 day too long. So what happened? Well, it's a sailboat. It's got an engine on it. But if that engine is not running, it doesn't charge the batteries. And if the batteries don't charge, you can't start the engine. Now, I'm not naming names, but someone who was 10 years old was plugging in his iPod and his iPad. It was kind of hot, so he's turning the fans on at night and everything. Well, 6 a.m., we're going to leave. I go to crank the engine, click, 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 right? We are stranded in paradise. No one is around. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have to say, I've never felt so helpless in my whole life. We're there. Now, we had food, we had water. It was a beautiful day. We weren't in imminent danger, but I had no idea how we would get out. It took us 6 days to get there in the first place, right? So what happened? I thought of this guy, Roy Eaton. Roy Eaton is a Canadian who runs a radio program every morning at 9 o'clock in July and August up in the North Channel in a little town called Little Current. And it's on your marine radio. You have to turn it to channel 71. And I remember that, well, here it says, he gives you marine weather, world and local news, community events, answers questions, relays messages between boats. And he starts off every program with this. He says, is there any emergency medical or priority traffic? Well, I'd been waiting for 3 hours, right? I had a message. So I had just enough electricity in the battery to use the radio. It went to another sailor somewhere who sent it all the way down the road, because this is pretty far away. And he got the message. He asked for my coordinates. I gave him our coordinates, and then my radio went dead. And that was it. We're sitting there for hours upon hours. I had calculated how long it would take me to take our little dinghy to go all the way out. It would have been 18 hours of continuous travel, and my wife and 10-year-old son would have been stranded in the boat. What am I going to do? So I called. Then we called in, and hours later, I see a sailboat on the horizon. And it's coming in our direction. And I said, could it be our rescuer? Well, it turned out that it was Harvey. Harvey and his wife had come to our rescue. They had heard the message. They're coming to our rescue, went way out of their way to actually get there. Took him a better part of a day to get there. As soon as he pulls up next to me, he points, he goes, "You're flying a Michigan flag." And I have a big block M that I fly up there. He's from Ohio. So I said to him, "I'll take it down." Well, he owned truck dealerships and stuff, and he had a battery. He brought it over to my boat, wired it in, got our engine started, stayed with me until everything was back in shape. Actually, he stayed in radio contact. And I said, "Okay, well, we're going to go all the way back out of here to that little place where Roy Eaton is. It'll take us a long time to get there. We'll get there late at night, plug in the shore power, get the batteries brought up to full charge." I'm so grateful to Harvey that what I wanted to do was to acknowledge him. I wanted to be on Roy Eaton's show the next morning and do a big shout out to Harvey and his wife for coming to our rescue. Right? So we're back there. Roy Eaton goes, "I had no idea what happened to you. You were rescued." And I told him the whole story. I said, "Could I be on the show to say something?" He said, "Absolutely." So I did, and I was glad to have that opportunity. And then somebody called in with a medical emergency. One of their crew members was severely allergic to bees and had forgotten this. You know what this is? An EpiPen. It actually contains a synthetic form of human adrenaline. And if you go into anaphylactic shock from a bee sting or what have you, you inject this and you will recover. Now, way up there, you can get help. You cannot get emergency help. It'll take hours to get for the Coast Guard to find you. If you have this problem, you could die. Right? The person called in and said, "We need an EpiPen." And Roy, I remember he's looking down and goes, "What's an EpiPen?" I had no idea what it is. He looked up, and our hands are up because my son has a peanut allergy, and we have EpiPens galore. We have them all over the place. And so we left them with Roy, who then passed it on to this other person. So this is a pay-it-forward story, one of the two explanations. So we got Harvey, who went on our way to rescue a stranger, me and my family. We went to Roy's show, and we were more than happy to pay it forward by helping someone else. Now, if we had known about that, we would have helped them anyway, but we were doubly motivated to help because of the help that we had received. So that's an example of paying it forward out of positive emotions. And there were a lot of examples of this. Here's another one. A kidney stone. I like this one because it starts with Matt Jones from Petoskey, Michigan, who decided to change someone's life by donating one of his kidneys. He said, got two, need one. Right? In fact, you can get by quite well with just one. And he decided, now he didn't have a family member who needed one. His only motivation was to truly benefit another person at a cost to himself, as a cost of his, losing one of his organs. And so what he did is he gave it to Barbara here, who was somebody who didn't know in Phoenix, who's married to Ron. Ron would have been very happy to donate one of his kidneys to his wife, but they weren't biologically compatible. You have to be the same blood types, and there's a number of other things that you have to consider. But he was so grateful that he paid forward one of his kidneys to Angela, whose daughter was so grateful, paid it forward and all the way through. So strangers donating out of gratitude for benefits received, that their loved one was actually saved. Right? So positive emotions can motivate paying it forward. That is not the dominant explanation. Most people would say that is entirely wrong. That when you really get down to it, it's all about our self-interest. That's the ultimate reason. At the bottom of all of this is something in it for yourself. Could be that you anticipate a future benefit of some sort that makes sense in terms of direct reciprocity. I help someone, and I'm going to count on them to help me in the future. It gets more complicated when I pay it forward, because who knows if they're actually going to come back and help me. But if you look at economists, evolutionary biologists, game theorists, they all say it has to do with reputation. And it is true, if you put people in an anonymous setting, in a laboratory, and enable them to act prosocially either in private or in public, they will act prosocially less when it's a private decision that no one will ever know what they decided, and they will act prosocially more when it's a public decision. But that only explains part of the variance. There's a lot more going on. That's not, if you look at the empirical data, it's an explanation, but it's not a sufficient explanation. It's one of the explanations. So this has been talked about in terms of reputation. Dick Alexander, who actually is an emeritus professor here at the University of Michigan, a biologist, who he wrote like the definitive text on this, a landmark book, and it was taken up by some mathematicians who came up with this idea of image, which is your history of helpfulness. And they've shown in some laboratory experiments is that if you have a reputation for helpfulness, third parties are more likely to help you. If you have a reputation for stinginess, third parties are less likely to help you. So there's some evidence that this is the case. And they would say this is really the reason why cooperation, prosocial behavior actually emerged in the human species. All right, so we've got one story about positive emotions, and we have another one about reputation and strategic action. So think about a barn raising, right? If the whole community has turned out to help you raise your barn, well, you won't go help somebody else to raise barn. That's a bad situation. You might be motivated to help other people because you're going to need some help at some point in the future. In fact, Putnam talks about this in his book Bowling Alone as the touchstone of social capital is the principle of generalized reciprocity, where I'll do this for you now without expecting anything immediately in return, perhaps without even knowing you, confident that down the road that you or someone else will return the favor. So that's strategic self-interest. I help so that I can get help from someone else in the future. Here's an organizational example of that. So IDEO, the creative design firm. So they have institutionalized the idea of generalized reciprocity. If a product designer doesn't know how to solve a problem or is struggling, they call a meeting of other product designers who very willingly show up and will pitch in giving ideas, solutions, advice, knowing that at some point in the future they're going to need help as well. So in an organizational setting, they have very, very well established norms of doing this, primarily based on reputation. Yogi Berra said, always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours. Right? Now that's strategic reputation right there. All right, so let's put both of these together with a little graphic here. So on left, we've got the pay it forward story. So A helps B. B feels grateful for the benefit received and therefore is motivated. Oops, telling you the wrong story. A helps B. C observes that happening and then is more likely to help B. So C rewards A for helping B. All right, that's the reputation side. The positive emotion side is on the right. So that A helps B. B feels grateful, pays it forward, and helps D. Right, those are the two mechanisms. So we can bring Carl Weick in. He talks about different grammars of organizing. Where organizing is a sequence of interlocked behaviors. And these are two different ways that behaviors interlock in an organizational setting. So paying it forward is you help me and I feel grateful, so I pay it forward by helping a third person. A different way that behaviors become interlocked is I help you knowing that a third person is watching is more likely to help me if I help you. Now, either one of those can sustain a system of generalized reciprocity in an organization, but we don't know which one is more important. Maybe they're both equally important. No studies actually pulled both of those together. All right, so here's a way that one of those chains might take place for illustration. So first we have direct reciprocity, the one that makes a lot of sense. A helps B, and B returns the favor. So that's direct reciprocity. We could have B helping C. A helps B, and B pays it forward to C. So A helps B, B pays it forward to C. That's sometimes called upstream reciprocity in the biology literature. On the other side, we have D rewarding A for helping B, sometimes called downstream reciprocity. So three different types of reciprocity. The main ones I'm interested in are upstream and downstream. In the study, we control for direct reciprocity. And then we can add a lot to this. You can see how this system would start to build over time. So we've got D, F, and G are rewarding reputations for helping. We have B and C paying it forward. A lot of this literature, or these different literatures, assume that there's one reason why we help. But I think there are multiple reasons why we help. You could help because you feel grateful for help received. You could help because you're rewarding a generous person. You could help out of direct reciprocity. You could help because it's easy. There's lots of reasons why someone could actually help. But that's how that chain of interlocked behaviors might take place. Okay, so here's the research question. What sustains generalized reciprocity? Is it paying it forward? There's an emotion story there. Or is it strategic reputation? And almost all the work that's been done before this assumes that reputation is the main driver. These two mechanisms have never been put into the same study before, so we don't know which one is more important. But the assumption has been that it's reputation. So what we need to do is run a horse race. Right? So we're going to measure both. We're going to control for a whole bunch of other possible explanations in a large study and try to figure out, do both matter? Does one crowd out the other? Is one more important than the other? Okay, so here's my organizational setting. It's an evening MBA program in a highly prestigious, very well-known Midwestern university. Two sections of students were compelled to take a course they didn't want to take. You know, a course in organizational behavior, you know, kind of courses we teach, right? So they had to take this core course. And so they participated in an online system for a 3-month period where they were required to make requests, post them online, and respond to other people's requests. And their quota was used that was 10% of the course grade. That you had to make at least 5 requests and 15 responses to requests during 3 months, and you would get 10% of your course grade. No bonus, stressed, and no bonus for going over the 5 and 15. And what they want to point out is that this is a participation quota. It's not a reciprocation quota. There's lots of different ways you can fulfill it. So Jane and I, we decide, okay, we're going to be buddies, and we're just going to keep helping each other back and forth. And you can hit the quota that way. Or it could be that I'm just going to do it in a random way. I'm going to look at anyone I'm going to help. I could help. I might help. I can just do it randomly. I could decide who to help based on reputation. I'm going to look and see who the generous people are and help them. Or I only help others if I've received a lot of help and I'm grateful as a result and want to pay it forward. So there's lots of different ways that this participation quota could play out. So here's some of the things that people ask for. They ask for all kinds of things. It was fascinating to read their requests. So one was advice. Recently, the sump pump in my house failed and the partially finished basement got wet. I can empathize with that one. The carpet got soaked, but I managed to dry everything out using fans and a dehumidifier. Since the carpet is now stained, I need advice on what to do next. Offline action. That means doing something, you know, in real life, face-to-face, outside of the online system. Hi all, I'm preparing for the CFA L1 in June. If someone is interested in joint study or discussion, review for the exam, let me know. Or asking for a referral. I'd like an opportunity to meet with a Target store manager or local area director for 1 hour to discuss Target strategies, etc. So some of the things that people ask for. Here's a distribution of the types of requests. So advice is about half. About half of all of the requests were for advice of some sort or another. Actions, offline actions were the least frequent, but they were important and they were there. Gives you an idea. So people ask for different things. So there was 125 people in 2 separate groups. They didn't interact between them, so it was 60 and 65. Over the 3-month period, they made about 750 requests and well over 3,000 responses to those requests. So a very high volume of transactions. Now, when you think about this, if you've got a group of 60 and one person makes a request, there are 59 potential responders. And so the number of decisions goes way up very, very, very quickly. In fact, it goes up so high that we have over 44,000 decisions to help or to not help. So very large amount of data over a 3-month period, which gives us lots of room for things that we can analyze. So I'm not going to show you any of these really painfully detailed tables that appear in the article. But I just want you to know that we use all the correct methods in order to analyze all these data. But I'm not going to show you all those tables. But they're there if you did want to see them. And then informally, we talked with a bunch of the participants just to get a sense of, you know, what did they experience? What motivated them? Why did they help to the extent that they did? Well, we have lots of really good behavioral data. We have time-stamped network data over this 3-month period. All right, so from talking with them, here's some of the things that they said, and I'll give you a flavor for the motivations that people have. So honestly, I did the requirement just to get out of the way. I didn't see any reason to continue. So this was only a few people, but there was about 5 or 6 people out of 125. They said, you know what, class requirement, I'm going to do it. Check that box, I'm done. I'm not going to do anything else. Make sense? Students are busy. So here's direct reciprocity. I was certainly more likely to help someone who helped me. I felt like I owed this person something. That's direct reciprocity. But some people said, nope, that didn't matter. So honestly, I didn't even keep track of who helped me, and it didn't factor into who I was helping. Now the reputation story. deter me from responding, I did make an effort to respond to individuals who I noticed were very generous in responses to others. So that's rewarding reputation. If I help someone today, then at some point in the future that favor will probably be returned. That's future self-benefit, building a positive reputation that's going to be rewarded in the future. Makes sense? Positive emotions. Because one of my requests required the responder to go out of her way to meet me. I definitely felt a debt of gratitude toward her specifically and to the group. And I received some really good contributions that made my life easier, and that was very motivating to help others. And when someone helped me, I did feel more likely to pay it forward because it offered a sense of community, which encouraged us to help out with each other. So, examples of positive emotions, gratitude in particular. And then this shows some of the ways that multiple motives could come to play. So this is a little bit of learning, a little bit of incentives and positive emotions. So I originally just wanted to get the thing done so I could move on. I did it early on, but as I would go back in, I noticed how people were still contributing and that it had a positive impact. I then thought I was missing the point by treating it as a quota, and decided to contribute because I liked the positive experience. If you give positive energy, you get it in return. So multiple reasons why this person would participate. All right, so what happens after people make the 5 requests for something that they need and the 15 contributions? Now, my economist friends would say busy MBA students would probably just stop right there, right? But maybe they would free ride. That is, they'll just make a lot of requests, but they won't help anyone anymore because it's not being incentivized. Or maybe they'll become more generous. So it gives you an idea of what they actually do. So we've got the quota. That's the 15 in red. The red is the actual number of responses people made. That's the quota for 15 responses. That's the quota for 5 requests. The blue line is how many they actually made. And that's just the students from 100 to 125. I just sorted it by the number of responses or contributions. You see that, so most people continue on. People tend to get a little more generous. But only 15% of the people actually just stopped cold and didn't keep participating. But there's lots of reasons why someone would continue. We have qualitative evidence. We have stories here about positive emotions. We have stories here about reputation. We can keep piling up those stories. But the only way to really adjudicate is to analyze that massive amount of quantitative data. So I'm going to show you graphs, not the actual tables. These probabilities are predicted probabilities based on a really long regression equation. But it gives you some idea. So, you get, on average, you have about a 5% response of getting, a 5% chance of getting a response, which means you get a couple of people responding for every request, which is pretty good. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you would get fewer. So there is an effect, which you documented. This is controlling for lots of things, whether you owed the requester or not. And so you were less likely to respond if you didn't owe the person who was making the request. You were less likely to respond. That makes sense. And if you were under quota, more likely to respond than if you had met the quota. But still, even once you met the quota, you were still likely to continue on. So we see, these I look at as sort of validation of the study. We do expect some direct reciprocity. That's on the left. We do expect some effect of the quota, that once you meet the quota, that incentive is gone. So we'd expect things to drop a little bit. But there's a lot of variation that still is not explained. Okay, so this is the... there's a lot going on here, so we'll take a moment to explain this. This is really the core graph. So we're trying to figure out, is it paying it forward with positive emotions? Is it rewarding reputation, strategic action, rewarding reputation? Since we had data over a long period of time, we could chop it up into different windows. So recent was in the last 7 days, in the last week, how much help have I received? Or how much help have other people given? That's reputation. So we've got the 0 to 7 day window. We have the 8 to 14 day window that we can look at. So that's 8 to 14 days prior to a new request being made. We can look at an older window, like 15 to 30 days. And since we had 3 months of data, we can even look to what people did, well over a month ago. And we include all of those in the equation. So those are actually coefficients from the regression equation. What you want to focus on is the size of the bar. And again, it's controlling for a whole variety of things. So the reputation story is in blue. So what this shows is the main effect is for recent reputation. So that people do reward reputation, but they focus on recent reputation. If If you look at 8 to 14 days or 15 to 30 days, those are actually not significantly different than 0. And there is actually a penalty for an old reputation. So if you were really generous a month ago, but you're not generous recently, there's actually a penalty. You are less likely to get a response. So recent reputation matters. So those who have argued that reputation is the main cause have, there's some support for that here. Recent reputation matters. Why would it be recent? Well, if you're going to keep track of everyone's reputation, that's a really complex task. It's cognitively difficult to do. So if you're in that group of 65, you have to keep track of what 64 other people did over a 3-week period. That's really difficult to do. So what reason is that there's actually a cognitive shortcut. You're more likely to rely on recent reputation because it's just a lot easier to do that. Okay. So the pay it forward story. Right, we do not measure emotions directly. There is no known instrumentation out there that can measure emotions reliably 44,000 times over a 3-month period. We measure it indirectly with a proxy, which is how many times have you been helped at the time somebody else makes a request. So I've been helped a lot. When you make a request, I'm more likely to respond to it than I haven't been helped very much. So we're looking at a count of the number of times you received help in the last week, how many times you received help in the 18 to 14-day window, how many times you received help in the 15 to 30-day window, and then old help received as well. All right, so what do we see here? There isn't much of a recent effect here. So people who have helped me in the last week or so is not very motivating to me. What is really motivating is what people have done more in the past. Very strong effect for the 18 to 14-day window, and a strong effect for the 15 to 30-day window, and then there's some effect over here, but they're all positive effects. All right, so I look at this, and we've done other analysis to show that, yes, so reputation does matter, but it's only recent reputation. Positive emotions matters more. It has stronger, it has longer-lasting effects. All right, I'll show you even more complicated graph that will demonstrate the same thing. All right, so a lot going on here. We've got the reputation story on this side, the gratitude story over on this side. We stand to the left side here. Remember I said that reputation is sometimes conceptualized as image, a person's image. This would be a count of the number of times that you have helped others when you make a request. And we have predicted probabilities of receiving a response over here, and that's controlling for all those zillions of other factors. We've got our different windows. So blue is the 0 to 7-day window. We've got 8 to 14, 15. There's the negative effect for old reputation. And the length of the line is the observed, is the range that we actually observe. So we're predicting a probability based on your image, your reputation, controlling for a whole bunch of other factors. So that's what this shows. So the biggest effect is for short-term reputation, in the last week. Over here, we've got the predicted probability of responding. We've got a count of the responses that you received, which we interpret as a proxy for positive emotions. A lot of people help me. I'm very grateful. And then we have the different windows here, 0 to 7 days and the other 3. And you can see they're all positive, and they have much stronger effects. So graphically, more evidence that the positive emotion story is actually a stronger story. It has longer and more lasting effects than reputation. All right, from this we derive 3 theoretical propositions. And the second part of the first 2 is generalizing outside of our study, because it's connecting it up to differences in the size of an organization, but I think it makes sense. So the first one is the reputation story. What really matters is rewarding recent reputation. That helps to sustain generalized reciprocity. But as an organization's size increases, that problem of keeping track of what everyone else has been doing is really, really difficult. So increasingly, we think, when the organization gets larger, you're going to depend upon that cognitive shortcut of just what have you done recently for other people? How helpful have you been recently? The idea of paying it forward based on help received seems to occur at any time. It has an effect whether it was recent or old. So gratitude has a much longer effect. Maybe they think about it even as positive mood that gets created over that period of time. And that does not depend on keeping track of what everyone else is doing. The only thing you have to know is how many people have helped me. And that single number is easy to keep track of, and we think that's why it's independent of the size of the organization. So in an even larger organization, we think the effects that we documented here would be even greater. And then finally, Proposition 3 pulls both of these together. So that generalized reciprocity in organizations is sustained more by the mechanism of paying forward help received than by the mechanism of rewarding personal reputations for healthfulness. But both of them matter, but the positive emotion story is a stronger story. So when you go through the review process, they always say, what are your contributions? You need to enumerate your contributions, right? So here's what we think are our contributions for this study. Remember we talked about prosocial behavior is the micro, meso, and macro level, and our study is in the macro level of prosocial behavior. We're not focusing on dyads, but the basic unit really is at least a triad, but it's actually these networks of interlocked interactions over time. So the triadic interactions over time, driven by both reputational concerns and positive emotions, sustains prosocial behavior in an organizational setting. Social exchange theory has pointed out the problem of prosocial behavior in a group is that it might be in your self-interest to take and never give, and that there can be a conflict between group interest and self-interest. It's good for the group if people give and take, but if you're selfish, you might just want to take and not give. So that's called the collective action problem. We think that positive emotions is an additional solution to that collective action problem. It's not just reputation. POS. So Gretchen and Kim, in the chapter they wrote in the most recent handbook of POS, said, we really need to have more work that's done on the O in POS. That's the organizing part of it. And so this is a contribution to POS quite directly. And we're actually looking at organizing, defined as Carl Weink's view of it, as these interlocked behaviors over time with two different mechanisms and running a horse race between the two of those. And then finally, we might have something to offer to evolutionary biologists. Though I haven't tried it out on them yet, so it'll be interesting to see what they said. But there's McCullough, who is a psychologist with co-authors, said, it's possible that gratitude is an adaptation for altruism in the human species. Maybe positive emotions is one of the reasons why cooperation emerged in the human species. And so our study suggests that, maybe it's quite possible that both positive emotions and reputations co-evolve and together account for the emergence of cooperation. So that's the most speculative of all, but our study does go in that direction and say at least we need to do more investigation of that. Okay, so positive practices. How do you actually do this? How do you create this? And so I'm going to share a tool with you called the reciprocity ring. Actually, who has used the reciprocity ring here? Okay, so a few people have. So this was actually the inspiration for the study, is that I'd used a reciprocity ring for a long period of time and never collected any data with it. Always wondered if it was useful as a research tool, and that really inspired the design of the online system that we use to collect the data in the study I just told you about. All right, so if you think about it in an organizational context, there are lots of obstacles to generalized reciprocity, to paying it forward, to rewarding reputation. So one of them, Franklin, is this marvelous paper, which says, we underestimate others' willingness and ability to help us. As a result, we make fewer requests. So that's one obstacle to generalized reciprocity. Fiona Lee, here at our university, has talked about the social costs of asking for help. And in some organizations, those are really quite high, that you wouldn't ask for that reason. Could be something about the organizational culture that inhibits it. The reward system probably doesn't measure it, doesn't incentivize it. A lot of reasons why there would be these obstacles to prosocial behavior or generalized reciprocity in an organization. So one solution to this is called a prosocial bonus. And this is a new area of research. I'm going to talk about the reciprocity ring in a moment. So a prosocial bonus works this way, where in an organization, if you're an employee and you observe another employee doing something beyond the call of duty, the company will give you a little bit of money, maybe $100, $150. You can give it that person as a reward. You don't want it to be too much money that people will help because of the money, but you want to acknowledge it. So that's called a prosocial bonus. Some organizations are experimenting with it. Google has already taken this much further, where they have a pay-it-forward twist to this. So at Google, if you observe somebody going beyond the call of duty, doing something beneficial for another employee, you can reward that person with a small monetary bonus, but then Google will give that recipient the same amount of money, and he or she can pay it forward when they observe a third party doing something prosocial. So that's the key part of it, right? Because you want them to pay it back, so they're just giving money back and forth to each other. A rewards B, who did something really great. B gets money in addition to the money that he or she received and can pay it forward to a third party. So that's one way in which you can use the incentive and measurement system in an organization to create generalized reciprocity. Okay, and then the reciprocity rate. So this is what it looks like. This is one of those activities where it's like if you've never ridden a bike before, and I could describe the experience of riding a bike, and I could talk about this theory of riding a bike, but you wouldn't really get it until you experience riding the bike. And it's a little bit like that. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about it, but you'd have to experience to really get the full, the full benefit of it. So there are some props involved here. There's the reciprocity ring itself. You see the person on the left is actually making a request. Remember, in the online system, you had to make requests. Here, you're just reading it out to the group, but in the online system, you would enter it into the system. The person, this is later on in the process, the person on the right there is actually reading out his responses, his contributions to other people's requests. The lines are drawn between the requesters and the responders, so you can see the network of helping starting to form. About 20% of those lines are direct reciprocity. I help you and you help me. 80% are indirect. I help you and you pay it forward to someone else. That happens about 80% of the time in the reciprocity rate. And then you can see the final result there at the bottom. So I'll tell you a little bit more about this. Here's some of the things that people have asked for. So you'd imagine if you had an opportunity today to make a request to the group, and it was one of these. So my teenage daughter needs tennis lessons with a pro in the Chicago suburbs. My request is to see a Bengal tiger in the wild. I was adopted at birth, and I'm looking for my biological parents' last name. My request is 2 tickets to an Emerald Eye, as Food Network celebrity chef shows. New York City is celebrating an anniversary. My son has just been arrested. I need someone to watch my 2 big dogs so I can bail him out of jail. All of these are real requests that were made at one time or another in the reciprocity ring, all were fulfilled. So you look at number 3. That looks like a pretty hard one. Someone made that request. Another person in the room knew how to do it because they had done it for themselves through DNA genealogy and freedom of information. And they sat down and coached that person, and that person discovered his biological parents' last name. Seeing a Bengal tiger in the wild. So that was made by a banker from New Delhi, India, here in Exec Ed, who was participating in the reciprocity ring. And he was a banker by profession, but his real passion and interest was nature. He always wanted to be in the right place at the right time to see a Bengal tiger in the wild. I got to say, when this person made this request, I said there was no chance he was going to get any help. Fortunately, I kept that to myself. I didn't say that. And it turned out he got more help than anyone else that day. Although no one in the room lived on a continent that had a Bengal tiger that wasn't in captivity. It turned out that somebody knew somebody who led safaris. They knew somebody else who used to work for Abercrombie & Fitch. And we know them as a clothing company. They used to be an adventure company and sponsored adventures and treks around the world. And one thing led to something else from the connection made in Ann Arbor. And sure enough, that banker was in the right place at the right time to see a Bengal tiger in the wild. All right, so there's examples of kind of personal requests. Here's some examples of kind of work-related requests. And I think let's see, go to number 2. I want advice on how to become the wealthiest, most productive commercial loan officer at my bank. Actually, that person got advice on how to use this principle of generalized reciprocity to build her business, and she became the wealthiest and most productive loan officer at her bank. Number 4, I'm about to pay an outside vendor $50,000 to synthesize a strain of the PCS alkaloid. This is made by a PhD MD scientist at one of the big pharmaceutical companies in a drug development team. I was running this ring. I had no idea what he was talking about. So I had to look it up. What I discovered is drugs from plants. That's basically what that is. And this is a good example of because somebody else in the room said, I had no idea that you had that need. I can do it in my lab for you next week, and it won't cost you a dime. So the company saved $50,000 because of that connection. All right, so when you make a request, And actually, this is useful for any request you might make to your spouse or significant other, your children, your parents, whatever. This is what I always coach people through. So when they make a request, you have to ask for something that's specific. You have to explain why it's meaningful and important to you. It helps motivate people. It has to be action-oriented. You actually ask for something to be done. It has to be real. Every now and then, one of my students will come up with one that's a funny one. It gets a laugh. It doesn't get any help. It has to be real. And you have to ask for it by a certain time. It has to be time-bound. 2 ways that you can help. And again, this is outside of the ring. When you think about helping someone else, there's really 2 ways you can do it. You personally can help. You've got the advice, you've got the information, you've got the resource, whatever it is, you can give it to that person. But if you can't, you can always tap your network and find someone else who can help that person and put the 2 people together. Those are the 2 ways that one can actually help. If you think back to the study, you can see this is what people are doing. They're making requests, making sure they're a well-formulated request. People are responding to them based on their reputation, based upon direct reciprocity, and so forth. All right, so about 20,000 people have done this around the world. It's been done in many different languages. It's been done in lots of companies and universities. And we sometimes have tracked in a business context what the dollar value is. And so people would say the average is about $150,000 of revenue generated or cost savings. Sometimes people say we've saved a lot of time. Saved a lot of time by getting that response met. And this shows you a little bit more detail here. Some of those numbers, you can see that the dollar value sometimes is much larger than that, but the average is about $150,000. And this is my last slide for you, which is that all this is going mobile. So we've teamed up with Adam Grant to take some of his ideas from Give and Take and our experience with the Reciprocity Ring, and we're actually in the process of creating this mobile app. And we've got we have a wonderful group of students from CPO who are actually just started participating in this to help us in the kind of the co-development of this. So the whole idea that we take something like the Reciprocity Ring, based on the research that we have done with it, can you actually recreate this through a mobile device? And that's the kind of the grand experiment that we're trying out with the wonderful input and cooperation of our students here. So, okay, we'll get up to questions. I might have an answer.
It struck me listening to you. So have you joined this work at all to energy work to know, is there a relationship between the level of reciprocity engaged of the kind and energy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, is there a relationship to energy networks, or positive emotions? Yeah, so Adam and I did a study a number of years ago with the Reciprocity Ring that we never published. But we used a well-established scale to measure positive and negative emotions prior to the Reciprocity Ring. People did the Reciprocity Ring, and then we measured emotions again afterwards. And we found a couple of things. On average, positive emotions went up for the whole group. They went up in proportion to how much help you received. So if you received help, you had more positive than negative emotions. And we also found that being generous was a very big factor in increasing positive emotions. So receiving benefits generated positive emotions. Helping other people generated positive emotions. Other questions?
Are there specific positive emotions that were measured, or was it a global indicator?
In the study that I just mentioned, yeah, we used the PNAS scale.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is this true across the whole world, for all ethnicities now?
Yeah, that's a good point. A good question. Is it true all around the world? Is it true by differences in gender? So we don't have study-level data around the world, but we do have the experience of running the ring around the world, and it seems to work in every culture and every language that we tried. It's been done in a lot. So I think that it taps into a universal human principle. And then gender differences, yes, there are gender differences. So in the study I reported today, we had a bunch of demographic information. Gender was one of them. And we did find that women tended to be a little bit more generous than men. It wasn't a big effect, but it was there. And that's what we expected, that would be the case. Pete?
Along the same lines, in terms of the structural position of the network, so all of these individuals in studies are equals. So I wonder
Yeah, so this is a good question. So I think social structure wouldn't matter here, because the participants were all more or less peers. If you did it in a hierarchy, we might see some differences. Maybe more likely to help someone who's higher up than someone who's not. And that's possible. We haven't done that study, but that's possible. We did do some network mapping of the results, and every time it looked like a random graph. So we couldn't find any structure in the network that was formed, which actually is consistent with the idea of generalized reciprocity.
Optimal number of people that would participate in these range, does it get I'm imagining too big, might become a problem? And if so, how would you confront that?
Yeah, that's. Let me answer the last question first, which is I don't know. Each ring has about 24 people in it, the physical ring. I've done it once with 500 people at the same time, but we divided them up into groups of 24, and I had a lot of assistants who helped me in actually doing that. I routinely do it in my MBA class with 60, 70 students, but I don't know. I don't know if there's an upper limit to it. And right now, the idea is that it's going to be like a private network with a fixed number of people, and hopefully technology will enable us to grow that, but we're not sure yet.
So the theory about positive emotions versus reputation, is that, do you believe, a product of gratitude as opposed to compassion or sympathy or charity or benevolence or something else?
I have another short answer, which is I don't know. When we interview people, they always talk about gratitude. And so I think that it is gratitude. And our measure is indirect. It's a proxy. But that would be another interesting study to do to see maybe different positive emotions have different effects. Maybe it's gratitude. Maybe in some cases it's compassion. It might depend on the setting itself. Yeah, there's lots and lots of different ways that this could go. Other questions? Yeah.
I was wondering, kind of another demographic question, if these were all MBA 1s or MBA 2s, if there was a mix. And the only reason I ask is potentially, I think in your first year there's a real pressure to build social networks, which I think would maybe amplify this, as opposed to your second year where you already have a job and there's not as much of a pressure to do that.
That's a good point. It wasn't in the full-time program. It was in the evening program. So basically, working adults were taking part-time classes, classes on a part-time basis. Yeah, so we might see differences if we did it in the full-time program.
In looking at this study, it seemed to me that one of the things we were looking at was this sustaining generalized
Reciprocity.
And I was wondering about the financial incentives, if you have any thoughts on that, because it's not an area of expertise for me, but I have seen some research, like Alfie Cohn's work on Punished by Reward, saying that financial rewards could really mess up sustaining this. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts with that as we watch organizations try things like Google is with this financial incentive system. I'm just wondering if they might actually undermine what they might be trying to create.
Right. So yeah, extrinsic rewards can crowd out intrinsic rewards or intrinsic motivation. That's certainly true, and there's a lot of work that's shown that to be the case. But I think the jury is still out as to how it would actually work out. So in the case of Google with their pay it forward prosocial bonus, it would be interesting to have those data and actually see if it helps or it hinders. My sense is that the incentives are necessary, even if it has a dampening effect, it's necessary to get people up to a threshold of learning. So if you remember back to one of the quotes I had is that, and a number of students told me this, that, this is just another course requirement.
Right.
I'm just going to do it. But then I just went and did it. Then I found out that other people had continued on, and I learned something in the process. So you might need to measure and reward it, at least in the beginning, to get it up to a threshold, and then it will be self-sustaining afterwards. But again, that's all an open question. We don't know from research whether that's true.
And I guess my concern is it seems so often organizations would turn money as the option. I'm wondering if there would be a more effective reward system to reward that learning that takes place. Right. There's something else besides money that would help, simply because of what I've seen.
Yeah, so one thing we're thinking about as a follow-on study is changing the quota. So it's 5 and 15, 5 requests, 15 responses. So what happens if it's 5 and 5, or there is no quota, or there's a much higher quota? So those would all be kind of experiments that we could, field experiments that we could do.
The quota, I assume, fit into their grade?
Yep, it was 10% of their course grade. So that was so it would be meaningful, but not ours.
Right. I guess that's what I'm getting at, is organizations, what else could be meaningful besides the financial bonus?
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's lots of experiments like that going on. So one is time off. Some is instead of paying a bonus to the person, is to pay a bonus to the person's favorite charity. That's another option. This idea of prosocial bonuses is pretty new. I think it's an area where a lot of research could be done.
I have another question that's part of a general puzzle that I think comes up when you're thinking about this positive organization stuff, and that is whether the transformation, the learning that you're talking about is happening at the individual or the collective level. And you know how Barb Ferguson talks about how when you get above a certain ratio, the form changes. And I'm wondering if again, there is a change in the capacity or the dynamic at the collective level that's helping to explain kind of this, and how that is different or similar than the transformation that happens in the learning of the individual. They learn that being generous is good.
No, I think that's true. In fact, some of the participants said that they started seeing their classmates as members of the same community. Or some said that they felt a sense of greater belongingness or solidarity or connection. And so that was a transformation, I think, that changed over time. So the evening program is a really good place to do a study like this because it's very atomized. They're all strangers. They're working full-time. They often have families. They don't really know each other very well or get to know each other very well. So you start with a collection of individuals, and we did see over time that more of them were talking about us, or talking about the group, the community.
It brings up a question I had. When one person helps me, I wonder if that might indirectly influence the reputation of the other people in the class. So I begin to see the class as a whole as being worthy of my reciprocity or deserving of my reciprocity. And so I might want to turn and help somebody else, which looks like a pay-it-forward story, but it could also be our class is so great because this guy helped me. I want to give back to the class.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Again, I think there's one strand of researchers in areas trying to find the single ultimate cause. I think that's a futile quest because I think there are multiple reasons why people help. And a number of things we're talking about here are all the ways. And so if you think about it in terms of an equation, there's a lot of variables on the right-hand side that will predict whether somebody would respond to a request or not. And that could be another one. Yes, Diane?
I wonder if you see a way of integrating this research with research on social support.
Yeah, I think so I think about Stephanie Brown's work that helping and giving support, the positive effects of that. So that would connect with the unpublished study that Adam and I did looking at the more generous you were, the higher elevation of positive emotions. That would be one. I sometimes think of this whole system as a system of social support. And what makes it powerful is that you're not depending on any one person. You're kind of crowdsourcing help. Because when you, either in the face-to-face ring or the version we created online, you post to the whole group. The whole group gets it. You're not picking out any one person. everyone's getting it, and then people respond or not respond. So I think that's what makes it more powerful as well.
Everybody knows who's responding to the
Yeah, completely transparent. Yeah, so you could look. That's why, because you could find out somebody's reputation very easily if that was important to you. That we built that in the system to make sure that you would know how generous or stingy every person was when they made that particular request.
Oh, are you finished?
I don't know, I'm free all afternoon.
So, John sent me an article a couple of days ago that I must have seen before, but I didn't remember it at all. And I want to couple the article he sent me with something else. I saw, and I think Jane sent me this one, showing a graph that when, for example, let's say somebody gives me money, I have a chance to give it to somebody else, keep it all, and so on. One of those experiments. And I think the conclusion of that study is if you give a person no time at all and simply an opportunity to be generous or not, altruistic or not, people tend inherently to be altruistic, generous. If you give them as much as 10 seconds to think about it, they get more and more selfish. Couple that with the one John sent me, which was a bunch of studies done, and essentially saying Americans give 3 times more per capita than any other culture. And people of faith, for example, give 7 times more money per capita, philanthropy and giving away and so on, than per capita in the world. Putting those two things together suggests that there may be inherently among all human beings this tendency toward reciprocity or giving, maybe not reciprocity, but generalized or altruism, generosity. But that cultural factors impinge a lot. Some cultures are more generous, apparently the U.S. Some are much less generous, and we can name several in his study that he found. So those sort of two things, is there an inherent generosity gene, and does culture make a difference?
I guess the answer would be yes to all of the above. That so evolutionary biologists have come to the conclusion that, in fact, we did evolve for cooperation. That cooperation enabled the species to grow, become more complex, division of labor, and so forth. So I think it is part of our genetic makeup, but there's a lot of variation by person. There are cultural norms, that some organizational cultures, some natural cultures are more generous than others. Speaking again to the universality of this is that, all religions, all moral codes, all philosophies have something about giving and charity and reciprocity. That's common among all of those. Tapping into it to a human universal. There's also variation. Example, there was a study done on donating blood, and they found really big differences by state. If you look at the 50 states, some states donate a lot of blood per capita, some states don't. And people are wondering why all the selfish people lived in one state and why generous people lived in another state. And so there's actually a sociological explanation, which adds yet another factor, which was it had to do with the system of donating and collecting blood. That if it made it easy, rates of giving would go up. So, like if people show up here at a convenient time and enables you to give blood, you're more likely to give blood than you have to go out of your way and go find a place to do it, right? And in some states it was very well organized. In other states, it was very unorganized. And so there's yet another. There's organizational factors, cultural, and then I think our genetic makeup matters as well.
Okay. Well, speaking of generous, I want to thank Wayne for the generosity of the gift of this talk, and to mark again that he is the first center member who gets the artifact that we've created, which is, for those of you who haven't been here, this is meant to symbolize a positive spiral. Janelle and her team sort of picked this out as appropriate for the center. So we'll pass it on to him and say thank you.